Welcome to Talking Synths, number 39. I'm Sam.
I'm Carlos.
We're from Syntaur, syntaur.com, where we have keyboards of all flavors, parts for keyboards of all flavors, parts of all flavors for keyboards of all flavors. Syntaur.com is the place to go if you need keyboard parts or keyboards. And we did just talk about recent development. Speaking of people that want parts, we are really getting hammered by the postal system. And we need to let everyone know that as of today, we are no longer accepting regular shipping overseas. And that sounds horrible. We're still doing express shipping or UPS shipping. We'll do whatever we can to get your stuff to you. But the issue comes down to Chicago. Everything we ship that's going overseas goes through a distribution center in Chicago. They are currently 6 weeks backlogged. So if you order something from us from France, regular first class shipping, it might take 6 weeks for it to get through Chicago.
Yeah.
And
you figure it takes at least a day for it to get from here to San Antonio. Then it's usually about a day or two to get from San Antonio to Chicago. Then once it gets to Chicago, it's not moving for a minimum of 6 weeks. And then it begins the treacherous journey of where is it on to next? What's the regulation that's going on right now?
Yeah.
What may be happening on the receiving end of things as well.
Exactly. Yeah. There are a lot of countries that are still having COVID restrictions on accepting mail and that kind of stuff. Another issue is airplanes. All the postal stuff gets put on cargo planes that other people own, such as UPS or FedEx or whatever. They got space left over. The postal system buys that space, fills it up with stuff, and sends it on that way. Well, a lot of those flights have been cut down due to COVID. It's just a mess. So we've had so many people not getting their packages that we just have to say we can't do it anymore, at least till all this settles out.
And one of the things of that to take into consideration is a lot of the parts that we haven't been manufactured for some period of time. So if you order knobs that you may need for a specific keyboard or I'm thinking Roland products right off the top of my head, vintage Roland, vintage Moog, switches, sliders, caps, things like that, and then it gets lost.
Yeah.
And then you ask for a replacement, and I've seen this a couple of times and it literally breaks my heart where it's like, that was the last one we had in stock and I don't know
where to get them.
Yeah.
No one else is going to have it. But the good news is, the stuff is eventually going to get there. The bad news for us is that people call or email and say, "Oh, it's been 5 weeks. My stuff hadn't got here. I'm telling PayPal you're not sending it. Whatever. Oh, we are sending it the same day you order it. It's just getting stuck somewhere, and we have absolutely no control over it, and it's very frustrating for everyone involved." So, sorry, guys and gals. We can ship it express mail or UPS. It's just more expensive, but we do want to get your parts to you. So,
and the good thing with the express too, though, is that there's more accountability.
Yeah,
and it guarantees that you'll be getting your product by the time that you need it.
And there's tracking from the point it leaves our building all the way to the point where it gets handed to you or put in your mailbox. So.
Yeah, watching the tracking on some of these it's interesting and frustrating at the same time as well.
Yeah.
I think we had a package we shipped to the UK, and for some reason or another it went to, what was it, Australia first?
On the way to the UK.
Yeah. And then we've also had packages that were quote unquote refused, and the shipping would show that they're either on their way back or, they've gone through two completely different locations within an hour of each other that are like thousands of miles apart, and we're actually sitting with the package in our hand.
No, God.
So it's like, I obviously can't believe what you read on the screen.
Yeah. Oh, and then another issue we found out too is because of COVID, everyone's understaffed, et cetera, et cetera. So let's say you're in the UK, you get a package from us, and they're going to say, well, you owe pounds and sixpence. Is that correct UK speak?
I don't know.
You owe a little bit of money for import duties. And so they got to let you know that so that you can pay the import duties. But a lot of times people aren't even finding out that information. So the package is sitting in the customs office, sitting there. Customs people are thinking, well, no one's coming to get it. And then they send it back to us, which takes 6 weeks or something for it to get here. And then do we start the process all over?
Yeah.
Boy, it's a mess.
Yeah, and then I think, I think some of this can also be mitigated by just proper planning if you do plan on placing an order. Because that's another email that we see quite a bit. This key spring only costs 99 cents.
Yeah,
but
can't you just put it in an envelope and put a stamp on it?
Yeah.
Well, if we do that, it's guaranteed to get torn and the thing will fall out. And then you won't get it. And then you'll think, well, they never sent it. I'm going to file a claim against them. And
yeah. But, if you can, maybe if you don't need a part right away, but maybe plan out the items that you would need and combine it into a larger order to justify the added shipping cost is basically what I'm getting at.
either that or use the order that you need to justify a trip over here and visit our
Yeah,
showroom.
it'd probably be a lot faster.
It may be more satisfying. Anyway, we're sorry. It's a big mess, but we're doing the best we can, and we're getting your orders out the day you place them, or if they come late in the day, we're getting them out the next business day. So take heart in that they're getting out, and that if they are getting wonky in the postal system, almost every time they end up at their destination, it just takes a while and the tracking looks goofy and whatever, but they do get there. Let's talk about something more pleasant.
More pleasant. How about firmware and EPROMs?
Ooh, that's very much more pleasant. Okay. I had a buddy many years ago. I had a piece of gear, and he looked at that piece of gear, and my buddy was a tech. He looked at that piece of gear and he said, basically, there's an upgrade for that makes it do new things. And I love that piece of gear, and I thought, ooh, new things. That'll be twice as good. And so I said, what can we do? And he said, it's just a firmware upgrade. So I'll get the chip we need, we'll plug it in, and you'll be good to go. Easy peasy. Who would have thunk? And as it turns out, it was exactly that. It was easy. It was quick. It added new features. It was like magic. At least back then it was, because I didn't understand what was happening. So we're going to talk about that sort of thing. And the magic all happens on an EPROM chip, which is an integrated circuit chip. And usually it has a little round window in it, a little glass window. And if you look in that window, you can see a little house and a bunch of people in there putting No, not really. It is actually kind of a neat sight in there.
They look awesome.
Yeah. Look at it with a magnifying glass, and it's very entertaining. But this chip stores data.
Ones and zeros.
Yes. And different size chips store different amounts, etc. But what you need to know for practical purposes is that if you have a synthesizer, and it's a modern digital-ish synthesizer, that it probably has its operating system on a chip like this, or on two chips like this.
Or three.
Sometimes three. Sometimes in the case of memory mode, like five or...
I think it's four.
Yeah.
4 in the memory mode.
But usually most chips, most synths, one or two of these chips. And when you see them on the circuit board, you're not going to see that little round window. You're going to see a paper label on it, and it's going to say something like OSV 1.03 or something. That label has two purposes. One is to tell you that, okay, that's version 1.03 of the operating system, for instance. The other purpose of that paper label is to cover up that little window so you can't see the house and all the guys inside. Because the way you erase this chip is to shine ultraviolet light on it. And so if that paper label isn't there and this sits out in the sun or something, I mean, it's kind of hard to do it really, but light does erase the data on this chip, or can corrupt it. So they put that little window on there to cover up. I mean, they put the little paper label on there to cover up the window to keep the data safe. Usually when it's in your synthesizer, it's closed.
Yeah.
I mean, I've opened up stuff where the label was so old it had flopped off, and I open it up and see the window and I think, oh, the data's gone. But I mean, it's been in the dark the whole time, so it's not really an issue. But yeah, you want to make sure it's covered up if that's the case. And so what my friend did was go into my piece of gear. He probably got out a little chip puller like this tool right here. He found the EPROM, put that around it, and yanked it up out of its socket. It's just pressed up in there. It's not too hard to pull them out, so you got to be you got to put a little force on it, but you also don't want to get too crazy with it, because if you pull it up like this, one end comes up first, then all the pins are going to be bent and it's going to be kind of a mess. You can also go in with a small screwdriver, and if you have the room on the circuit board, and kind of pry up one end, pry up the other end, and then pull it out that way. So it's not real hard to remove this. And then basically you take the new chip that has data on it and you put it back in the same way. Now this chip has a little notch on one end. Now what's that about, Carlos?
That's just to make sure it's orientated properly. And you'll usually see the silk screen on the printed circuit board that'll show you which way to orient the EPROM.
So a lot of times on the circuit board it'll have a little rectangle in the shape of the IC, and then it'll have a little dipsy doodle on one end.
And one thing you want to be very careful with is just making sure that none of the legs get bent.
Yeah, that was the next thing I was going to talk about. Back in the Ensoniq beta test days, they'd send us a prototype keyboard, and then once a week, once every few days, whatever, we'd get a FedEx package that had new EPROM chips, because they've been developing rapidly the software, and so we'd have to pull the old ones out and put the new ones in. So very quickly I got used to pushing these in the sockets, and what you say is exactly true. If you're not careful, you can think you got it aligned, and then you press it in, and what's really happening is one pin isn't really in there, and it kind of curls under, and that makes for a whole lot of mess.
And in a symptom of that, usually what happens is when you swap chips and you go to turn it on, and then you have it won't boot up. Yeah. It's just like a blank screen, or the screen is garbled. Yeah. And you think, oh my God, what did I do to my prized synthesizer? I destroyed it.
And so the answer the remedy for that, pull out the new chip, put the old one back in, make sure it boots up right, and then
double check all your legs.
Yeah, see if your legs are good. Yeah. And I don't know if you have any tricks, but for me, when I'm putting in an EPROM, I find it easiest to put one line of legs in first, and then kind of push it down to line up the other side of legs. Now, I don't push it in. I just make sure that one line of legs is in the holes, just kind of hanging on, and then I make sure the other line's going to fit. And sometimes you got to scooch it over, put a little pressure on it one way or the other to get everything to line up. And then once you see it is, you just push it home.
Push it in. Yeah. I like over time you kind of acquire just little tools and knickknacks that make things easier. And so a while back, I took a small flathead screwdriver and actually just grind it down, with the little grind wheel. And I made it real thin and long and flat. And so what that helps me do is to get underneath the EPROMs to lift them. But then also when I'm reseating them, I can take that flathead and kind of press up against it. You always have problem legs. There's like that one leg that never wants to go in and kind of goes haywire and sticks out, and I can take that little flathead and just kind of gently guide it back in. But I have damaged EPROMs, trying to pull them out and then reseating them one too many times. The legs get bent, they become brittle, and then they'll snap off. Yeah,
especially if you're dealing with a synth that might have had battery corrosion damage or something. Oh, you might pull the EPROM out and
the legs
don't come with it.
Yeah.
But speaking of tools, one tool that I found kind of handy too is when you go buy paint at Home Depot and they give you the little paint can opener. That's kind of handy because it's sort of like a screwdriver tip, but it curls up a little bit, so you can take that end of that, put it under one end, and just kind of pry it up that way. So
I've been wanting to invest in a set of like really nice dental picks, you know, because they have the different curves and they tend to be real thin, flat, but still sturdy. So you can get in at different angles and then move things around.
And then if you decide to change career, you've already got a head start.
Yeah.
So, you can get updated EPROMs a lot of times from the manufacturer if it's a current synthesizer. From places like Syntaur, if it's an old thing, let's say you have a Oberheim Matrix 1000 or something and have a really old OS in it, we can fix you up with a newer OS. And new OS versions typically do two things. First and most importantly, they fix any bugs that might have been in previous versions. Like, okay, when it gets too much MIDI data, it crashes or something. And so, okay, now we fix that bug in the next OS. So it's real handy to install that. And then the other thing they can do is add new features. I remember in the Ensoniq heyday, they'd add things to the sequencer a lot. Like, okay, now you can change the speed of a sequence, or during a song, or change the sequences during the song, or I don't know. There's a lot that you can do, but a lot of times they're kind of minor fixes, but every now and then they add something really major that is like, wow, yeah, that really makes it worth upgrading. Another thing is that when you change EPROMs, a lot of times you want to reinitialize your piece of gear. And in fact, a lot of times when you pull out the EPROMs, you're going to lose anything that's in there. That's not a hard and fast rule, but it can happen. So before doing any of this kind of stuff,
back up your patches.
And sequencer data, and anything that might be in the memory. And even if you don't lose it, when you reinstall the new OS, a lot of times it's good to reinitialize. A lot of times you have to reinitialize. So you had an interesting experience with the OB8 the other day.
Yeah, it was Nick and I. We'd been working on 2 OB8s actually. And
Oberheim classic vintage polyphonic synthesizer.
So we definitely have the luxury here of sometimes when you're diagnosing an item or a unit, it's like, oh, this OB8 isn't working. It's okay, we'll grab the working one and let's compare the two.
Yeah.
So it's definitely a luxury. But so basically we had one OB8 that the upper voice board was not working. As in, the OB8s are nice because they have LEDs that cycle and will tell you which voice you're on. And when it would cycle through the voices of that top board, there was no output. So we immediately started looking at op amps, summing, VCAs, audio path, continuity, and everything was working fine.
Everything worked, it just didn't work.
Yeah, everything worked, it just didn't work. And so we took those voice boards out and put them in the working OB8, and lo and behold, they played just fine. So I said, okay, that's kind of weird. And then an interesting thing that we found out in that process with the OB8, when you do auto-tune and it calibrates the voices, if a voice fails calibration, it'll skip over it when it plays.
Right.
Which I think is a very useful feature to have. So what that told me then was when we did the auto-tune process on what we thought were the faulty boards, the CPU and the voice boards were communicating because they all passed the auto-tune, which was just made it even that much more of a red herring. We started looking at the DACs. DACs were just fine. And Nick was going through the owner's manual, and lo and behold, he found a reinitialize procedure, which involved holding down all 8 patches and then hitting split mode with your elbow. And it literally says, in the owner's manual, use your elbow to hit the split. Which we did, and it brought back the top voice board, and they worked just fine.
Yeah, amazing.
And I would love to know what caused that issue, and what was preventing those voices from coming through in the audio path that reinitializing fixed it.
Yeah. Well, sometimes things just glitch out.
Yeah.
if it's software, glitches can happen. Static electricity, all kind of weird stuff can cause some kind of communication failure or data corruption in the RAM or whatever. And when you reinitialize, it wipes out the RAM of the keyboard memory or the where the OS is living and operating, and then it loads it back in from the EPROM chips. And that was always a thing with Ensoniq, back to them again. If things started acting up, you just reinitialize, and that in many cases would solve the problem.
And then even when I'm diagnosing keyboards, a lot of times I like to just start with the blank palette, and go ahead and do the reinitialize procedure. Especially in workstations, things that involve like mixing and you have multiple tracks, because you never know how the previous owner had things set up to work with their system. You don't know if there's global mutes, if there's global effects that are being routed. So sometimes, if something's giving you a good run for your money, try reinitializing it. It's not going to work every time, but the times that it does work, it'll take
really
a lot off of your plate. Like, whew, that was, because we could have sat there all day. We were looking at data sheets for different CMOS flip-flops, trying to figure out the audio path. We had the oscilloscope out, and it was just really throwing us for a loop because everything on paper looked fine.
You just needed to press 8-9 buttons
in
at the
your
same
elbow.
time. And good thing your arm was exactly 1 cubit long as measured by Oberheim. That's funny. I guess it could be a 2-man job to
we just 2-manned it. It was a lot easier.
But that's funny that the manual says use your elbow.
And then also sometimes there'll be some visual feedback to let you know that your instrument has been reinitialized. Sometimes the reinitializing procedure involves holding buttons down while you turn the instrument on.
Right.
So like we tried this a couple of times, holding down all the buttons and hitting the split, and it wasn't really doing anything. But one time when we did it, all the lights flashed, and I was like, "Oh, okay, that was
Got
it.
it.
Got it.
Yeah.
Got it. Yeah."
Cool. And so how do you put data onto an EPROM chip? Well, we have a little gizmo that I have hooked up to my computer. It's called a Mini Pro, and this just plugs into the computer via USB, and then there's some software that runs it. And basically it's got a ZIF socket, zero insertion force, I think is what that means. And you can just drop a chip in there like that, clamp down on the socket, that holds the chip in place, and then you open up the software and say, okay, this is what type of IC I'm using, and go ahead and write this data to it. And we had some fun on the Synth Wizards episode when we did an SQ80, that we changed the operating system up a bit to where when the SQ80 booted up, it would give a different message and stuff, and sort of customize the OS that way. Wasn't any big deal. It didn't add any new features. It just was like, oh, look, it says this instead of that. And the way we did that is we read the OS from the chips of the SQ80, and the computer in that software displays all the data line by line, row by row, whatever. And it's mostly just gibberish looking, or dots and zeros or whatever. And then, but if you scroll through, you can usually find something in English, and that's usually what's going to go on the display. So if you look long and hard enough, you can find the message that you recognize as, oh, that's what comes up when you turn the SQ80 on. It says Ensoniq SQ80 or whatever. And so then you can, for instance, if it says Ensoniq SQ80, you can go in, you can find that digit that says the 8 in 80, and you can change it to a 90, and you can make it say Ensoniq SQ90 or whatever. And so it's a process of reading that data, digging through it tediously until you find the right stuff, changing it, writing it, burning it back to another chip, installing that in the SQ80, and that usually works. So you can have some fun with it that way. Fun with EPROMs. What else to talk about with OS and?
Well, you know, and then obviously I think kind of the later you go on through the timeline, then you get SysX, so, you know, firmware updates via SysX. I've updated some of my instruments via USB. I'm kind of just waiting for the day you can just download it from the cloud.
Has that ever been scary? I remember the TB303, the TT303, Cyclone Analogics. They had a setup to where you could update the OS that way, and I could never get it to work. And I think if something went wrong, you could even make the thing not work at all, and that always frightened me. Have you done a lot of that?
I haven't done a lot of it, but I know, you know, from messing around with just like some Windows and PC stuff, because I've definitely messed up computers that way. And then reading service manuals that always say, you know, if you're going to do a firmware update, make absolutely sure that you have power going to both devices and power will not be interrupted. So, you know, what was... I feel like I broke one of my instruments this way, as in I was doing an update via USB and I tripped over the power cord and disconnected it.
And what was the fate? Were
I
you able to reload
I think
it?
I bricked it. Yeah, I'm trying to remember what it was. So it's just, you know, during a lot of these times like this, you want to be aware of your surroundings.
Yeah.
You know, don't put more on your pile than what you need to be doing, and watch out for USB cables so you don't trip over them.
And technically, too, you should watch out for static electricity. They do make a wrist strap that can ground you, and it's a good idea to wear that. Seems like the Andromeda might have an issue like that. Well, when you're talking about breaking something, I'm thinking, well, you could always just pull the chip out and put another one, but probably in that instance, it's all surface mount stuff, and it's not a EPROM. It's you can't rewrite to it. So.
And I mean, I know I say this all the time on the podcast, but read the owner's manual. You know, just there's a wealth of information out there. I've definitely put myself behind on projects by getting ahead of myself. Yeah. I remember working on a couple of E4000 and EMU Ultra series samplers, and I was like, oh, you know, I'm going to go ahead and update the OS on one because I had the floppies. Well, one was an Ultra version and the other one was non-Ultra, and if I would have read the owner's manual, I would have seen that they weren't compatible, and the first one didn't have enough memory to hold the later OSs. So sometimes what you have is what's called like a flash prep, what you're doing is essentially clearing all of the original memory. So once I did the flash prep, there was nothing left. It completely wiped blank. And when I tried to load the new OS, the file was too large. So then in that instance, I was left with an instrument that was dead. It's completely blank. Fortunately, I was able to order the original OSs off of eBay, had to wait a week for the floppies to get in, and then basically put back the exact same program that I just wiped clean from it. So yeah, just compatibility issues. Make sure you read thoroughly if you're going to go through with a firmware or OS update. Check your compatibility. Oftentimes there'll be different revisions of instruments, Mark 1 and Mark 2.
Oh, right.
Is yours a Mark 1 or a Mark 2? Is this OS update suitable for both revisions?
Yeah.
Just things to be aware of.
Yeah. And back to the Andromeda, I think it's got a flash chip that's a surface mount chip, and a lot of times that data gets corrupted. So I don't know if there's any way to... it's a mess when that kind of stuff happens. So yeah, be careful, do it the right way, and cross your fingers and face the North Magnetic Pole and hope for the best. So, but it's a cool thing to be able to usually just pull out a chip, put in another one, and now your stuff does cool new things. So that's a great way to design synthesizers, and a lot of other things in the world are designed the same way.
Pinball machines.
Probably video arcade games and all that. So, well, cool. So, wish you luck if you're upgrading, and we do have a lot of upgrade chips, especially for the Ensoniq stuff. So hit us up if you need something. And until then, we will modulate later.